Have you ever noticed that your salary slowly increases over the years, yet the sense of financial progress rarely feels as large as the numbers suggest? My name is Jack, and I have spent over 10 years helping people navigate financial decisions, and one of the most consistent patterns I have observed is that rising income does not always translate into rising financial freedom. Most people assume that higher pay should naturally lead to greater financial comfort, yet many households quietly discover that the opposite seems to happen, as each incremental raise appears to dissolve into new expenses, shifting expectations, and subtle economic forces that operate beneath everyday awareness. To understand why this occurs, it helps to step away from the idea that income alone determines financial progress, and instead examine the surrounding system in which income exists. Modern economies are structured around continuous growth, which means prices, services, housing costs, and lifestyle standards gradually adjust upward over time, often faster than people consciously notice. This process is not always dramatic, and it rarely appears as a single large change. Instead, it emerges through many small adjustments. Rent increases slightly at the end of a lease, subscription services quietly adjust their pricing, transportation costs shift, insurance premiums climb, and everyday goods slowly become more expensive. Each change on its own feels manageable, but collectively they alter the financial landscape in ways that gradually absorb income gains. At the same time, human psychology introduces another layer to the equation. Behavioral economists often describe a phenomenon known as reference shifting, where people evaluate their financial well-being relative to their current environment rather than their past circumstances. As income increases, social comparisons subtly recalibrate expectations about housing, travel, education, and daily consumption. A salary that once felt significant eventually becomes the new baseline. Once that baseline shifts, the same income that once represented progress now simply feels normal. The financial system itself does not pause during this adjustment, so rising costs and rising expectations begin to move together. There is also a mathematical component to this pattern that is easy to overlook. If expenses expand proportionally with income, even small increases in lifestyle costs can neutralize much of the financial advantage created by a raise. For example, when housing upgrades, vehicle payments, or recurring subscriptions grow alongside income, the portion of earnings that remains flexible often stays surprisingly similar. Over time, this creates an experience many people recognize but struggle to explain. They earn more than they did several years ago, yet their financial margin, the gap between income and commitments, feels almost unchanged. From a systemic perspective, this pattern is not accidental. Modern consumer economies rely heavily on spending activity to maintain momentum, and rising incomes tend to circulate back into the economy through housing markets, services, consumer goods, and financial products. This dynamic supports economic growth, but also means that income gains often re-enter the system quickly, rather than accumulating as long-term financial buffers. Understanding this mechanism does not require rejecting economic progress or avoiding improvements in lifestyle. Instead, it simply reframes income growth as one part of a larger equation rather than the entire solution. When people begin to view raises not only as opportunities for new spending, but also as opportunities to expand financial margin, the relationship between income and financial progress starts to shift. The same increase in salary can produce very different outcomes depending on how much of that increase remains outside the cycle of expanding expenses. Over long periods of time, even modest differences in that margin can quietly reshape financial flexibility, allowing savings, investments, or reduced financial stress to develop gradually in the background. So the reason your salary can feel smaller each year is not necessarily because the numbers are misleading, but because the surrounding economic system, combined with natural human psychology, continuously adjusts the environment in which those numbers operate. Once you see this interaction between income, expectations, and systemic costs, the question changes from how much money someone earns to how much financial space they are able to preserve within the system itself.